Greetings, everyone, and welcome to episode 71 of Teaching Tales, the podcast totally devoted to sharing stories from the world of education. I am your host, Brent Coley, elementary principal in beautiful Southern California. And joining me today is the one, the only, Sarah Johnson. Sarah, how are you?
I'm doing so well, and I'm a little jealous because California's sunny and Wisconsin is frigid.
Yeah, I've been following some of the tweets and seen Joe Sanfilippo's 1 minute walks to work and stuff like that. It's not quite that bad. It was a frigid. I think we had a high of 58 today. So and so
Um,
and we were complaining, but it's like I will not. We will not complain there. So
no, and I think everything's, relative to what your experience is. So if that's
it's
cold to you, then it's cold.
well, it was chilly. I wouldn't even say it's cold. So yes, we count our blessings here in Southern California. Cold is, like you said, a very relative term. So, well, Sarah, as we were talking before we started recording, I am really excited to chat with you. And before we get into that talk, for anyone who is not familiar with you or your work, give our listeners a little background. Who is Sarah Johnson?
Oh boy. Okay, so I am an educator. I am recently enjoying the experience of being a podcaster. I've published a couple of books, and I'm a mom and a wife, and just trying to figure out what I am supposed to be for the rest of my life. I have a, excuse me, a mentor that always asks me what I want to be when I grow up, and I love that question. And he's asked me that for, I think, a total of 17 years, and I'm just still trying to figure that out. But I have been a English teacher. I was a 6 through 12 English teacher on a cart in a tiny little district. I've been a leader at the district level and at the building level for elementary, middle, and high school as a principal. And currently just loving the space where I get to serve educators and other professionals with the message that came out of the first book that I was able to co-author, which is Going Beyond Balance. It's the Balance Like a Pirate. I spent a lot of time sharing information that I learned and continue to learn on that to help educators specifically, but also others just to kind of be immersed in their full lives. And then I recently got a book published by myself, which just seems kind of crazy. I didn't publish it, I wrote it, but just on a framework for leadership that's spiritually driven. So I'm just really loving that. And in a season of my life, just trying to serve well with the gifts I've been given. And one of that is the In Awe podcast. So I amplify women on that podcast, and I launch episodes every week that I believe has a mission and the message. So, I mean, there's a lot of little things going on in this world that add up to kind of a big thing, but serving others and educators specifically is really my passion.
Well, I've recently connected with you via the Professional Learning Network, and just in the very limited time that I've come across your work, as I said, I just wanted to really have a chat with you because, excuse me, because what you're doing, and most recently your newest book, like you said, talking about building that strong foundation. You talked about balance, which is so important. I remember in my second year of teaching, I think I've talked about this in previous episodes. It's like when I came to that realization that you're never going to get it all done.
Mm-hmm.
Like we could stay at work till midnight every night and we still would never get it all done. And such a freeing experience that was for me. But your newest book, Lead with Faith, we've talked about in my podcast, risk taking. I was looking back at previous episodes, episode 2, episode 3, 18, 41 are all about risk taking. But you talk about, and as I was talking before we started recording, I'm not totally done with the book, but what I've read so far is you're taking it like beyond just taking a risk to living in faith. Mm-hmm. And you talk about like slaying fear. So many of us, we struggle with living in fear. I know I do. And you talk about living in faith, and you write about a story, a professional story that really resonated with me. And if you're comfortable sharing that, I would love to hear kind of how did you step out into faith professionally?
So, well, here's the cool part. When I think about the term risk, I think my illustration is obedient risk. And that's how I've aligned my life. And it's not been an easy journey, but as I share in that Lead with Faith book, it once I became convicted, it was really quick. And I can't say I haven't questioned it because it's kind of bananas to up and resign from your dream job.
Mm.
So I always share this. I wanted to be a principal before I even finished my teaching license. It's just a passion of mine. I loved leading and serving, and in that role, there's just so much influence that you can have. But I also have shared, like in Balance Like a Pirate, I lost my identity in the service to that role
Mm.
for a good long while. And when I talk about, whether leading out of faith or leading out of fear, I know what it's like to lead out of fear. And as an administrator, when you have all eyes on you all the time, and my particular context, in my most recent position was just very fraught with disruption and challenge to a degree that I know now few people have, experienced all of the things that I did in a short amount of time. But the interesting part is, and anybody that knows me and knows the local story, or at least the version they think they know, is I actually left this position not at the time when it was the hardest. That's why people were so surprised, because
Yeah.
things had finally settled and we're going in the right direction for a lot of reasons. And I had a conviction from the Holy Spirit. I'll never forget it. It was a Thursday. We had a snow day. And I brought my daughters to swim at our local hotel pool. And I was just sitting there writing in my journal. And I can open it up now and look at it clear as day. I needed to leave, and I needed to not question it. And I was going to be asked to stay, and my husband wasn't going to want me to go, but I needed to do this, to step out in faith and to take the path that God has made for me.
Mm.
And it was, I mean, yeah, it was scary. But, and I'll tell you, I came home and I told my husband, and he said, only crazy people leave their job without one lined up. And I've shared that with him. We kind of chuckle now. But we did. We ended up making that decision together within a span of a couple of days, because things just happened in such a way that you can't explain. But we
Yeah.
just both knew. And so I didn't up and leave that minute. We held on to that information for a good month and processed what that might look like. And then I did submit my resignation in February to be effective at the end of June. So I had the opportunity to lead and gracefully walk away from a position that I loved and people that I loved. And fast forward to now, that risk has been stunning. I never would have thought. So Balance Like a Pirate came out just days after I completed my contract. And since then, I'm able to keynote and go around the country and speak and share a message of hope and restoration and immersion. And with this book, Lead with Faith, I've written a labor of love and the message that I believe I was called out to write. And I know that I could not have done that the same way had I been in the mix of that lovely, intense job of the principal role. So I can see why, I needed to be able to have space to focus. And also, to be very honest, I needed to be able to remove myself so that I could see myself more clearly, because I had started writing a pretty ugly narrative based upon what I believed others people perceived of me. And so I just have been able to kind of regift a lot of that reflection that came from that very heavy risk. And it's been good. It's been beautiful.
Well, again, from what I've read so far, I just to encourage you that God is using your book with me because
Aw.
it has really resonated with me, and that was one of the things that resonate. You used the word obey, and that you knew you heard His voice and needed to obey, and that is a really scary thing. Like your husband said, like only 30 people quit their job. It's kind of like, because we had I had a similar experience, a couple similar experiences, but the first one was, and this one don't think I've shared before, but my wife had a similar experience with that with her job, where she heard the calling that she needed to leave
Hmm.
and came to me saying, Brent, I need to leave this job, which meant we would not have the income that we were definitely counting on. And it meant we would probably lose our house.
Mm.
And the crazy thing was when she told me that, and I said, okay, which she knew then this must be a God thing because that's not me. I mean, I like to control things and have things under control. And the fact that I was like, okay, it was like, obviously I was attempting to be obedient, and without going into all the details, it was a long road, but where we are now, the trials and tribulations that we went through because of that, we came out on the other side much stronger, much closer, and just again, it's no fun going through it at the time. It's scary, really scary, but just when you obey and come through the other side, you can see it on the back end, like, wow, that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I'm proud of you for supporting that, and it's nice that you can, kind of share the other end of that, that things have gone well, because I think when you're in the midst of it, even if you still there's the world, especially, I think, does a really great job of questioning us to make
Mm-hmm.
us feel like we got to be, crazy. Is it really possible that that's why? Or, did she get fired? Or, there's all those questions I'm sure that you all faced,
Yeah,
when you're making a choice like that. But I'm glad to hear that it worked out well for you too. That's
yeah.
awesome.
Well, thank you. And like you said, you would not be where you are today, having the opportunities where you are today, and being able to travel and to serve in a different capacity to a larger audience than your 1,000 or however many students there were, 2,000 students in your school. You're now able to impact countless more um, all over the country. So I just think that's amazing.
Well, it is, and I'll tell you, this is something that I guess I've shared, but maybe your listeners will hear it for the first time. Is that I got consistent messages over and over was that I'm so supposed to seek to teach masses, and that old dreams would become new. And it was like I consistently every day for several months got that, and I would rewrite it and rewrite it, and whatever that meant. And even still, I'll be honest. I mean, I've wanted to land back in a position. I thought, oh, this position opened up in our district. It must be my time to get back into school leadership. And my husband is actually the one who reminds me now, which is very interesting. Is that that's not masses. You have 26 staff members, 350 students, which is big for where we are. That was not masses. And he reminds me of that. And though I miss like the daily interaction, it's true. So, and that old dreams will become new piece. That's been, so I actually started out wanting to be a broadcast journalist. And so doing the podcast is kind of nuts when you think about that. And I've always wanted to write books, and I'm in the middle of writing a fictional novel too. And so there's just a lot that's happening right now that is so clear that whenever, if you're lucky enough to hear like directive from the Holy Spirit, you better listen. Like,
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
just be honest. Very
exactly.
few of us can hear those words so clearly and distinctly. And even still, since now I don't want to pretend as if I do all the time, I still question and I still humanly misinterpret what is meant. So
Sure.
anyway.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like you said, we don't, yeah, when you hear it, and usually, oftentimes, at least with me, sometimes it's kind of like I look back and think, oh, geez, that I probably should have listened, or yeah, had I listened, how many problems would I have saved myself?
Sure. So did
So
you have a second story? Because I think you said you had two.
I did. So, and this one was more professional with me, and just it revolves around that faith, kind of like with you, feeling like, you know what, I need to step down. When I had just gotten my my administrative credential, I had the opportunity to come out of the classroom. My principal was going to have some surgery uh, over the winter break, and asked me to come out and kind of be like an interim assistant principal while the assistant principal stepped up and was the acting principal in her absence. She thought, wow, this would be a great opportunity for you to get some experience. And I'm like, yes, that would be fantastic. Unfortunately, the story doesn't have a happy ending in that there were some complications and my principal passed away.
Mm.
over the Christmas break. She never made it out of the hospital. So what was supposed to be a couple month thing ended up extending into the rest of the year, which was, talk about baptism by fire. It was a very long 6 months. But at the end of that, I had the opportunity to, the district let me know that they were interested in offering me the position the following year, like permanently, like to be the new assistant principal. And as soon as they had told me, as soon as they communicated to me that day, hey, we're thinking that we'd like to offer you this, I started to doubt.
Mm.
And I remember thinking, like, what am I doing? You've worked so hard for this, and now you're doubting? And I remember I called my dad and I said, Dad, I need to talk. Can you come over tonight? He lives locally. He came over, and for 2 hours, we talked back and forth. And I'm like, Dad, I've been working. I got this credential, 2 years getting a credential, and I've had this amazing opportunity, and I don't know if I want it. Prayed and we talked back and forth. And after 2 hours, he finally said, what's the desire of your heart?
Mm.
And as soon as he said that, I lost it. And I just gushed. I just said to go back to the classroom. I thought I was ready, but I wasn't. And that was, my decision was made right then and there. The hard part then came telling the district.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, because I'm thinking, am I committing career suicide here?
Mm-hmm.
They're offer. It's like, if I say no, am I going to be blacklisted? But I felt that conviction that this was the right thing to do. And I had that faith that I need to go back to the classroom. And I communicated to our district leadership that, with that, like that prayer, like, Lord, please help this to go well. And I was told that, if anything, I garnered more respect in their eyes because I was following my heart. And I went back to the classroom for 3 years. And they basically said, you let us know when you're ready. And I did. And I'm now in the 7th year of the principalship after 2 years at the AP level. So, that story for me, it, like what you had shared in your book and what you just shared at the beginning of the podcast, it reminded me so much of my own experience of the fear that I was struggling with, of, if I follow my heart, if I do this, this is what might happen. I might be blacklisted. I might never get this opportunity again. But in that moment, and again, like you mentioned, I don't do this well all the time. I don't want to come off like, oh, well, I'm always living in faith, because I'm not. But in this instance, I lived in faith. I didn't listen to the fear. I led with my heart, and it paid off. It was the right thing to do for me, and I truly believe that God blessed that decision, and the things that I learned in those 3 years back in the classroom. Somebody told me, I can't even remember who, but said, you needed to go back to the classroom because there were 90 kids who needed you to be their teacher for those 3 years. Those 30 kids each year needed you to be their teacher. And I needed them to be my students. I had more to learn. So we don't have, we've got Google Street View, not the Google Earth view that God has. Like, we don't even see it all. But I don't know, that what you wrote resonated so deeply with me because it was so similar to my own experience.
Well, I love that story for a lot of reasons. And I wanted to make sure to acknowledge those circumstances for you to be pressed into. It's really hard because anybody in a learning community that's experienced a loss, it's challenging. But to experience the loss unexpectedly of the lead learner in the
The
building,
leader,
the principal, that would just be, I bet you have stories from that that are still traumatic. You know,
yeah,
that's no joke.
it
That
was it was
transitioning
it
like
was
that.
it was the hardest 6 months of my career that felt
Yeah.
like 3 years.
I bet. And two, I think it's really beautiful because I think I've worked enough with when I was one myself that once you got in, you're like, can I go back? I very distinctly remember after my first principalship having a conversation with my principal that I had left as a classroom teacher. And he said, we still have the position open. We hired a long-term sub for you. So if you want to come back, and I think when you know what you're supposed to do. And if you have to do the hard things, you do. But I'm so proud of you for listening. And I imagine that having that 6 months experience made you a better teacher. And then having that teaching experience with that back view of that administrative lens really made you a better administrator all along. So that's just really beautiful to hear.
Oh, it definitely, and it gave me such a greater perspective.
Yes.
Because having sat in the administrator chair for 6 months and then going back to the classroom, it's like, whew, you appreciated those classroom things more, but also gave me an appreciation for what an administrator goes through
Yeah.
because I had walked in those shoes for several months, and the again one of those things where I would never wish those circumstances on anybody, on anyone. That being said, when you go through something like that, it's the type of thing where, um, geez, if I can make it through that, I think I'm good. So not, I mean, knock on wood. I mean, I don't want something like that, but when you go through times like that, I think it really it builds you up and it shows you what you are capable of enduring, for lack of a better word.
hmm Yeah, and I think if any of your listeners are principals, and I think teachers experience this too, but it's just at such a massive level when you're leading a building and a learning community in that way, is that it's shocking how much you can endure and how strong you can be when you never thought you would be. And
Yeah,
you're having those conversations with families, and maybe you're the one who knows that their child passed, or I don't know. There's just so much held there in that austere position that you just really can't prepare yourself for.
no, no, until you're there. I
Yeah.
mean, you and yeah, and it's yeah, until you're there,
Yeah,
you
and
will never, you don't know.
unless you have that strong foundation, right? Like, that's nice to believe in that, so,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely, and that's, I mean, that's really every episode kind of has that theme, and I always try to pull like a moral or something for listeners to take away, and again, in reading your book and talking about you sharing your stories, it's just that it, slaying your fear
Mm,
and not being controlled by fear because you mentioned like when you were a building principal. I mean, there are so many challenges going on, and there's so many things to fear
mhm.
as a teacher, but as an administrator. I mean, like for me, when I started in admin, the thing that I feared, one of the biggest things I feared, and I don't know if you ever experienced this, was email. Was
Yes.
did you is being afraid. I mean, literally, I didn't want to check my email because I was afraid that there might be a an angry parent in there or some kind of complaint, and for a long time I let that control me, in that it just I lived in fear of that darn Outlook,
Mhm.
that darn Outlook app. And I've gotten, I mean, and I won't lie and say that that never rears its ugly head,
Mhm.
but um, have you experienced anything like that in terms of?
Oh, yeah, and my husband's a teacher too, and so we talk about this. Those, emails can be they can just really be a problem. First of all, the volume that you receive
Oh,
as an
oh,
administrator is just stupid. Um, and I think our culture has just become so entrenched in that it's easy to just fire off an email, right? And that creates a burden. So actually, I talk a lot about the only way that I was never really great at managing this. And I started at the end of my career to say to my staff, look, the email is too much. It's taking away from every aspect of my life. I got to get a hold of it. So I started to set some very clear boundaries around it. And I was afraid to do that because I felt like, oh, I have to have an open door. It has to be in all areas of my life. And so when I think I can't remember how I did it, but I don't remember how many days I had left when I said this and said, an email. If you expect a response in this amount of time, send an email. If you need one by this, send me a text. If you need this, come see me face to face. From
Mm.
now on, I will always, start out like that instead of just when I'm trying to finish well.
Yeah.
But I would say definitely, and I will be honest with you, there there have been times when the email became so dramatic and stressful for a variety of reasons. For listeners, it could be parent, it could be a parent engagement, it could be a colleague. For administrators, maybe you've had a tough boss situation or whatever. For me, there could be a particular name that'll pop up in my inbox still, and I will get like my chest will well up a
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think like turning off notifications
Oh, yes.
for
Eh,
me was the most freeing. And for people listening right now, if you're not if you have your notifications on, it doesn't mean I don't check my email a lot, because I do, but I check it on my time,
Yep.
and I'm not controlled by the little red number attached to uh, the email icon. I cannot encourage people enough to turn those off.
Yeah. And I recommend this in the sessions that I do, is to actually take it off your phone. And the
Yep.
reason for that is, we start to scroll and we become inefficient when we do it that way. But everybody has their systems. And I've learned that over time. For me, it was, I would set calendar appointments to check my email, and I would say, I'm going to delete it, delegate it, or respond to it. And just make a commitment to do that. And also, you don't check it after a certain amount of time, because nothing good happens after 9 p.m.
I'm not going to be able to solve whatever problem is coming through at
No,
10.
I'll just lose sleep. I'll lose sleep over it, and it will steal my joy, and I will wake up depleted in the morning. So, yes, it's a
Amen.
good boundary to have for sure.
Amen. Amen. Well, Sarah, and for anyone listening, I mean, what I'm taking out of this conversation and what I'm taking from reading your book is a life without faith. I mean, for you and me, I mean, we are two people of faith, so we know where our faith is and where our hope is. Um, it's hard.
Mhm.
So I just taking those risks, listening when you hear that voice, listening, like you said, being obedient and following that voice is so important. So I just, again, I'm so thankful that you uh, listened to that voice and wrote this book and are encouraging people, and excited for the opportunity that you get now in your new role to influence the masses on a much larger scale than you had before.
Well, thank you for that. Before we head out, I wanted to share with you one thing, and I did actually just post this today. It's interesting because in writing this book, I knew the framework, and I knew that it was leadership based. And I had a fear of trying to tie it to a spiritual connection for a wide variety of reasons. I think in the Christian faith, there's just so many different interpretations and belief systems. And it just, it was a challenge to feel like I could be the person to bridge anything for anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I shied away from that. I'll be really honest with you. And I submitted the manuscript in June for this. I did not have a lot of connection to biblical truth. And it's really fascinating because it could be a framework that stands alone. It's an acronym. Faith is free to be authentically you. The F and A is affirmed in purpose. I is intentionality to influence and inspire others. T is transcending titles and embracing transformation. And H is leading with heart. So it's about wholehearted living and emotional intelligence and empathy. And so you could see where that could just stand on its own. And the difference is, and this is the key, is that November that year prior, I was wandering, I was searching, I was so lost. I was in the wilderness. I'm like, okay, my family's at school. What am I supposed to be doing? And our church did a fast, and I thought, I'm wasting time. I'm seeking and I'm searching. I'm trying to find a space to work for somebody. I knew that I needed to sit and fast wasted time. So I was directed to study the life of David. I've been told long from the Holy Spirit that I have a heart of David. And though I sort of knew what that knew what that meant, I didn't know its deepest implications. And so this is the best part, I think. And that's why I wanted to share, to have the listeners hear that piece, is that my publisher came back and said, I thought this was going to have more of a spiritual connection. And so I said, I was afraid. I thought, I'm not theology is not my area of expertise. I'm speaking from my lens, but I sat in silence and, was reminded, you have this entire journal that we wrote together back in November. Look to it. So I looked at it, and here it is. It's David's life lived out through the faith framework, and it's biblical truth from that. And there's literally a note in there that says, someday you will see how we are going to use this time, my daughter. And there it was. So there is a spiritual connection, because that is how I'm supposed to lead. But I do know, and the feedback I continue to get is that people don't feel like they have to have my faith to grow in this message. And that, to me, is what masses means.
Yeah, and I think that comes through for people who do share that. They can relate to that. But for, like you said, the principles are there regardless, and it's awesome. It's awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Brent. I appreciate you so much.
So, well, again, so for anyone who wants to get in touch with you, wants to follow you online, social media, where can they find you?
It's just way too easy. So it's Sarah, SARAHSA Johnson. And that would be on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I have a website, which is sarahsajohnson.com. And I'm highly engaged. So, connect with me. I'd love to have a conversation or help you with any question that you have, or just have a conversation as well.
All right. And the books are Lead with Faith and Balance Like a Pirate.
That is correct.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to continuing to read the book. So, Sarah, thank you again for taking the time. Really, really appreciate you.
Thank you, Brent, and for sharing your stories as well. They really hit me tonight. I appreciate that.
Oh, very good. Cool. Thank you. And for everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. Totally appreciate it. Hope you got something out of this. As I usually say, even if you didn't, I did. So really, if no one listens, I'm still getting something out of this, right, Sarah? And if you haven't already subscribed, be sure to subscribe to iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. If you like what you hear, go ahead and leave a review. Again, that's not about ego or anything like that. It just helps get the message out, gets the podcast more to, like you mentioned, Sarah, to the masses, so we can reach a wider audience. And if you're interested, again, my book is called Stories of Edu Influence at storiesofeduinfluence.com. It's all about, kind of like what we do on the podcast, stories from my experience. One of the stories that I shared tonight is chapter 10. So if you like more of those kind of stories, pick up a copy of the book. And until next time, thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.